Good morning, everybody. Thank you ever so much for coming along to this breakfast meeting. Keep on helping yourself to breakfast, by the way. That is a good thing to do. And well done for everyone making it through the horrible storms this morning. And I'm always impressed by people who make it to breakfast meetings altogether, actually. So perhaps you lot weren't all partying last night, I don't know. So welcome to this SME for Labour event with Thacum Homes. It's to discuss housing, which is always a top topic at Labour Party conferences. Something that matters to the trade union movement, but something that also really matters to Labour Party members and conference delegates. I think every time you look at those lists of motions that people want discussed, housing always comes top of the agenda. So how it's going to work is I have here with me Dan, who is Mayor of the West of England, newly elected in May, beating the Tories, 40,000 majority. And to my left I've got Rob, who is from Thacum Homes and will tell us more about their plans to build green and environmentally friendly homes. He tells me they're starting in the south and working north. And then it's very much going to be over to you. We'd like to hear your ideas, your comments, and have an opportunity to have a proper series of 3 different round table conversations and one oblong one. So first of all, I'd like to hand over to Dan to say a few words for us.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, and thank you everyone for attending this morning. And I share Alex's sentiments. I admire anybody who gets up this early to do anything, frankly, and it's lovely to be with you. And thank you for braving the weather, because I did think I wasn't going to arrive at one stage as I was coming down from the conference centre there. Look, housing, I can't begin to tell you, is probably the most important issue, actually. Without a home, just think about it, without a home that is comfortable, affordable, safe, secure, what can you do in your life without a huge amount of effort if you haven't got those fundamental things? So we can't really over-prioritise it. It's something that is so important. And yet we've got a situation in our country where historically, probably because we've seen house ownership rather than other forms of being in homes, creating tensions within society. So if you're of the generation like mine, where you happen to get on the housing ladder because you were told that was the right thing to do, and it was for us, you're probably okay. Not everybody, but probably, many people are. But if you're of a younger generation, like Jonathan there and others in the room, you are probably really excluded. So you might be cash rich, but you're probably asset poor in terms of being able to get your own home. And we've got this odd situation where young people now have to kind of work out what relatives might leave them when they die, a deposit effectively, so that they can get their new homes. And that is a crazy, crazy situation. So I think it's fair to say the market is kind of broken. But the problem we've got is that some people have done very well and are very comfortable, and others are completely excluded. And we genuinely have to resolve that, and we have to do that pretty quickly. I reckon we have to do that within the next 20 years, because I think the way it's feeding through, it's going to cause all sorts of challenges for everybody, even those who think that they're probably comfortable now. But it is a real challenge, isn't it, if you think about it, because you've got people with vested interests. If you've got a home like I have, and you've paid your mortgage off like I have, there's very little incentive for you to personally change anything. But I do think, actually, that people who are grandparents or have children really do understand the challenges that are now coming through. And I think they're starting to hear some encouraging things, like the real questioning of how affordable homes are. What is affordable home? Because it's used as a term to really mean the least cost home, isn't it? Rather than genuine affordability. And that will probably be the key to unlocking this. And developers, I don't blame developers for doing what they do in many respects, because they're in it to build homes, they're in it to make money. That's how our business system works. There's actually nothing wrong with that. But what we have to have is we have to have a system that also recognises need, if you like. Because if we don't do that, it won't matter what happens in the far future, because we'll all be in a terrible place. So how do we make homes more affordable? It's about land, really, and I think it means that we have got to think about how we make land available for homes in the future. The kind of debate we have, because if you're in the west of England like I am, where you've got a large city like Bristol which is desperate for homes, begging for affordable homes, needs them, wants them, requires them. And yet the areas outside that are more leafy, more suburban, are saying they don't want homes because they're worried about their green environment. And we've got to reconcile that if we're going to find a solution to this problem. Because what happens, of course, is that people who started off, and lots of people from rural areas, and I've represented a rural area as an MP and been a rural affairs minister, move from the rural areas into the cities in the early parts of their lives. Not sure that's a good thing, but that's what happens because of the housing market. And then they end up, if they do well, moving out again. And so this cycle keeps going round, where we don't have enough homes where we need them, and probably where we should have homes, we don't. So I think we've got to use a bit of equity here. I think we should be saying things like, everybody should carry their burden in terms of producing new homes. So if you live in a remote hamlet, you should have your share of homes, not a no-go area, but you should do your bit. Similarly with market towns or villages, they should do their share. And then cities, obviously, they want and are desperate for affordable homes. But if we want them to be able to deliver, we have got to give them the land, because that's the problem. It's all about land, I think. And we'll hear about this later. And it seems to me that what we've got to try and do is get the government to think more long-term. Because this is a long-term solution, there isn't a short-term solution to this. And the trouble with democracy, the best system we have, admittedly, but the trouble with democracy is it's very short-term, isn't it? It's in very short cycles that don't meet this need, which is why it hasn't been sorted before now, to be honest. So what I think we need to do is have lots of infrastructure spending, because there's an awful lot of land that can't be built on because it's floods or there's other issues. So we've got to try and make that available. We've got to incentivise the use of brownfield sites, first and foremost, so we use all of those up. And we have to be flexible, and this is a hard thing to say, but it's what is the solution. We've got to be flexible on green belt. So what I mean by that is that the Labour government quite rightly brought in the green belt. Very important thing to do. I think lots of people agree with that. But what we need to do is bring it up to date. Because actually the green belt that we designated after the Second World War is not necessarily the green belt we need now. So when I look at biodiversity and look at what's happening, I want corridors for bees and other animals to move around, etc., etc. That isn't necessarily where the green belt is. Sometimes it's not even designated green belt. So we need a reappraisal. If we do those things, get more land, incentivise the use of brownfield sites, and if we think about green belt in a slightly different way, just as environmentally concerned, but in a new, more flexible way, I think we've got a real chance of squaring this awful circle. Because if we don't do it in the next 20 years, we will have even worse consequences to deal with. Better to do it now, I'd suggest, than to do it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for kicking off this important discussion. So now I'm very pleased to hand over to Rob.
So Thacon, we are three things. We are a strategic land promoter, we're a house builder, and we're a partnership builder. On our partnership building side, we build for councils and housing associations exclusively. We're a little bit different to most of our industry, quite proud of that and quite unashamedly so. Thacon has never delivered a scheme that wasn't policy compliant on affordable housing. So if we have to build 30%, 40%, we build it. And the second thing is every one of those schemes has always been what I call tenure blind. So you shouldn't be able to walk onto that development and tell me which is the affordable house and which is the private house. And we always mix them up, so they're pepper potted, we mix them up. And that for us is a basic of society. And that's just where we are. That's for me is what it's about. You know, if we're going to try and create two-tier societies and different types of housing for different looks and feels of housing because it relates to how much money you have or perceive to have, etc., that's wrong. So we're very clear, we're tenure blind, and we're always policy compliant. We've never run a viability exercise on a piece of land. And it does come back to what was said there. Ultimately, that comes back to land value. You know, we have to pick the land up at the right price, we have to afford to do that, and we absolutely, that's our business model, that's what we do. We're infrastructure led as well, so we want to deliver schools, community, right at the start of the development rather than at the end. We have a partnership with a charity called the Plunkett Foundation, which are the biggest provider in the UK for communities that are losing perhaps a pub or a shop. They'll come in and help that community form a trust and get together and get a shop or a pub back into operation. What we do, where we're building, is we'll build the shop, we'll build the cafe, we'll build the WeWork facility, and we gift that into the community trust. So they get that on day one with no debt, ready to go. And that for us is about protecting that asset in perpetuity. The danger is if it goes to a private shop and there's not enough patronage, enough people going through there, that shop will close after a period of time. And I think further it establishes community. We're just coming to the end of the piece of work we've been doing now for 2 years with Oxford County Council, looking at how good community creation addresses social inequality and health inequality. And for us that's really important. We're going to march around the countryside, developing areas and building lots of houses and homes, etc. We want that done the right way. We want that done with a way that is the standards of the times, a way that creates community and a way that looks after people and brings people cohesively together. And finally, we've set the agenda. I sit on the HBF, the House Builder Federation Future Homes Task Force. That's our drive towards net zero. We at Flakem have been very clear. Every home we deliver will be net zero, zero carbon in lifetime use from 2025. We'll be carbon neutral in production by that point. And we're delivering zero carbon placemaking as well. Thinking about how we move people around, thinking about the facilities we give people, and reducing not just their housing carbon footprint, but also their transport carbon footprint alongside that as well. That does make us a slightly different place to a lot of our industry, and we're comfortable with that. What we want to try and do is inspire more of our industry to follow, show it can be done, and to get on that bandwagon with us. So that's perhaps a little bit about us. We are, as you said, south-focused. That's purely because I was living here, I started the company here. We're now up as far as sort of Oxford to Cambridge, and we're heading further west, and we'll keep going further as time goes on, hopefully, and we become more successful. So, yeah.
Thank you, Rob, and I think it's so important that we've got people who are trying to build communities rather than just houses, though we do need many more houses too. Right, so now it's going to be very much over to you. We're after ideas, comments, suggestions, contributions. I can see we've got experts in the audience as well, so anyone want to kick us off? Otherwise I'm just going to choose some people. Excellent, very good.
Do you build to the currently, I'm
Who are you, first of all?
Yeah. I'm in
Where
the
are you
room.
from?
I'm in the room. All right.
We can hear you fine, actually, don't worry.
I'm Mayor Andy from Mansfield, and housing obviously is part of the things that we do, and we're trying to build to the future home standards and the passive house. But obviously they cost more. So my first question is, what sort of standards are you building to at the moment? Because we're obviously building wherever we can ahead of the current building regulations. And so yeah, that's my first question. What sort of standards are you building at the moment?
Very good. Shall we get a few more ideas, contributions as well? Yep, at the front again.
Just a quick question, Mark. I'm Executive Chairman of Set Newgate UK, a big PR company. How are you finding the planning system? What changes would you like to see to the planning system in order to facilitate development, but to facilitate the right type of development? Because to me, it strikes me, partly some of the job work we do is great because the planning system is as it is, but it strikes me that so much time and money is tied up in the planning system unnecessarily, and actually whilst still being able to give people a choice and a say in what the development is locally, but it does seem to stop a lot of good development and tie up money and capital for far too long. And I just wonder what your thoughts, what changes you'd like to see.
Very good. And the woman at the back in the black, blue maybe? Oh. It's early in the morning.
It's gone back in the rain. Thank you. Hi, my name is Nishaba Khan. I'm a councillor in Medway. My question was just around the government's refocus on home ownership and whether you think that is the right direction to be going in, or actually whether currently government policy and potentially local authorities are a bit behind on understanding how quickly the rental sector is moving.
Okay, we've got loads to
Do you want
get
me to
going
kick
with
off?
there. Yeah, I think so. So you've got passive homes, you've got planning, huge issue, and home ownership. I'd love to keep us going the entire rest of the time, really.
So let's start with what we built to. So we made a conscious decision to go where you were talking about, and that is what we call fabric first. So passive house principles. So rather than bolting on zero carbon PV panels on the roof and other bits and pieces to start with, we started in the fabric of the building. So we're not trying to deliver something that's so airtight that it's not great to live in, but we do deliver something that the basic principles in terms of the fabric, the insulation value, and heat recovery, moving in warm air from south-facing rooms and swapping with north-facing rooms, that sort of thing. So our standard product has been 48% of the way towards zero carbon for the last 3 years now, with no bolt-ons. So we're almost halfway there, just in the fabric of the building, which is I think, is a good step. We every private house, and here's a real anomaly, every private house that we've delivered for the last 3 years now has had a fast car charging product. I stood with the chief executive of a housing association on a big development, and he was, "Oh, this is great, this is fantastic. Why haven't the affordable ones got it?" And I turned around and said, "Well, we wanted to put them in. Talk to your management team that's standing there, and they'll explain to you why they wouldn't put them in." You know, and I think this is where we've got to see certain sectors catch up. The likes of housing associations, we want to put it in. You know, for me to say that every home, again, it comes back to that 10-year blind bit. It wasn't completely 10-year blind, but I wanted to put the fast car charging points in. It's very, very small cost to us actually to do it. And they didn't want them at that point in time. They want to be ready for it, but not in. So I think we've still got bits there to catch up with. The rest of the industry's catch up, which is something that has got to come through. But we definitely feel that fabric first, that passive house principles are the right way to go. What we are seeing, absolutely, and I think we're going to see very, very quickly in the next 5 years, is a reduction in cost as we swap from the likes of gas boilers to air source heat pumps. So we're looking at major suppliers, Valiant, Ideal now. They're gearing up to stop building boilers and start building air source heat pumps. So the price per unit is going to come down dramatically. We've got to see that happen across the industry, absolutely, to make it work. So I think we're on that journey, we're getting there, but fabric first I think is definitely the way, and I think you've got to have that embedded value. You can't just bolt everything on. It's got to be thinking about what you're doing from the start before you start the process rather than halfway down. So in terms of planning, shall I go with the planning one as well? Do you want to?
Do you mind if I can? Because I've got to
Yeah,
go in about 5 minutes.
That's
That's
okay.
okay. Well, look, thank you very much. I'm afraid I've got to go in about 5 minutes in another event. But look, what I want to say is a couple of things. Firstly, I think we should be really taking the hike in prices for energy really seriously. I remember when I was Environment Minister, my civil servants told me that this was going to happen. And interestingly, it didn't seem to happen. This was sort of 11 years ago. But I think it's going to happen now with a vengeance. So I think we have no choice but to go to the highest possible standards. Otherwise, people will not be able to afford homes to run them. It's no good having a home if you can't afford to keep it going. And I guess the other thing I should say is that we need to incentivise everything we can, in every possible way, other forms of energy production. So not just air source, but ground source as well. That's going to be quite important. We've got to think about, when we look at the planning system, how we can allow that to happen, because not everybody has a giant field outside their home, of course, so we may have to go vertically up or down. We've got to work out how we do that. Is there technology to get that into quite small spaces? Because that's the answer. We need to look at communities and their histories. So, for example, wouldn't it be good that if mining communities that have actually contributed to CO2 emissions, inadvertently, no one knew, but they have, wouldn't it be great if we could run pipes down the old mine shafts and get the heat out of them to heat our homes now? So we need some innovative, creative ideas. And also, wouldn't it be absolutely great if we really had a government that pushed hard, genuinely, towards net zero as soon as possible? Simply because Britain, one of the smallest countries in the world, most influential arguably, but one of the smallest, in the history of the planet has produced the second highest level of CO2 of any country in the world. Only America has produced more CO2. Just get your head around that. Tiny Great Britain, Northern Ireland, has produced that much CO2 in the history of the world. So having been the first, of course, to have the Industrial Revolution, we should be really ambitious to be the first industrial country to have a net zero outcome. And lead the world in that way, and then use our history and our language and all our connections throughout the many hundreds of years since we've been industrialised to be able to persuade the Chinas, the Brazils, the Indias that actually we're not hypocritical about this. We understand that you want your industrial revolution too, but we want to work with you to make sure that's a green industrial revolution, not one that adds to the problem but actually helps solve the problem. But we only do that with moral leadership, which is why the Tory government stopped talking about coal mines and reopening this, reopening that. They have really got to get themselves sorted out, frankly, because we have a huge role in leadership, I think, around the world when it comes to climate change. We also have amazingly clever people in this country who are going to be the people who deliver the technology that makes a difference, not just in our country, but around the world. You know, lighter, stronger aircraft, engines that are more fuel efficient, engines that use completely different kinds of energy sources. So we are in a very strong position. and people like this gentleman and his organisation should be given every opportunity to build those high quality, environmentally friendly homes that do genuinely have affordability built in. And we've also got to switch away from the notion that people must own things in order to have secure and safe homes that they have control over. Abroad, people are used to renting and knowing that they have security, and we need to probably shift that way too. House ownership has only been popular because if you didn't own your house, you didn't have control over your destiny, where you lived and what you did in it, and we must change that. Now, I know the Tories want to do it for different reasons, because they believe if you become a house owner, you become a Tory voter. But look, I don't believe that's necessarily true. What I think people want is they want choice and flexibility, good quality homes that they can afford to run and they can afford to buy. And we've got to do everything to incentivise this company and others to do exactly that.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to go back over to Rob. Then I'm going to try and make you all talk a bit more. Otherwise, it's going to be like mastermind before Rob having to answer every single question.
Let's come back to the planning point then. I think planning is a highly emotive issue for many in this country. I think at a base level, most of the population accept we need to be building more properties because we need to house more people. I think it's also part of our system, our makeup, that it's a democratic society. You know, it shouldn't come down to a draconian way to decide where housing goes or not. It should be basically, I believe, in the hands of people to decide. So yes, elected members should decide what is acceptable, what's not. I think we have to try and find a way to balance it. It's a difficult one, definitely. You know, we end up, I think, half the time creating homes for tomorrow's objectives. You know, probably because we're building on the edge of a village or a town, because that's what most of the time happens. And of course, you know, those people will tomorrow look out over a green field that they want to keep. Absolutely, and I understand the right for that. But we have to create a position where everybody has a secure home. And I'm touching on the question over there. You know, I think the right of everybody in this country is to have a home that's theirs, that is secure. What the ownership or the tenure is less important. It's a long-term future in that property that they're secure and they've got, that they have the right to. And that's got to be a basic right of society, that everybody has a good quality home, a home that is safe, it's dry, it's not damp, it's, you know, etc. We can absolutely bring down, you know, fundamentally net zero lifetime use is no energy bills for a house.
Right.
That's what it means. You know, you're not paying to heat that home. Now, you know, we've said every home we deliver will be there by 2025. The technology exists today to do that. We're building net zero homes now. There's a cost there. At the moment, that cost is about 8 to 12% more than a traditional house to deliver that. That will come down because air source, heat pump, ground source, etc. The cost that comes down because we're using far more of them as an industry. But fundamentally, you know, we can be there. You know, we can be in a place where 48% fabric first. You know, the average 3-bedroom home, their energy bill, £200 a year to heat. It doesn't need to be any more than that if it's done properly. And actually, in 4 years time, where we're at, you know, every home won't have a cost for heating that home.
Does hydrogen play much of a part in that, or is it just heat pumps?
I think as a country, it's probably the same debate we've got with electric vehicles. You know, it's probably going to be a multifaceted, response. It's not just one thing. I think it's going to solve the problem. You know, for us, it's about reducing down the energy demand on a home as much as possible, and then looking at the right way to deliver that. That could be photovoltaic panels. That could be computer-controlled infrared heating, where we're heating the fabric, thermal properties like the sun, rather than traditionally how we heat. That could be ground source heat pumps, absolutely. You know, all of those air source, all those solutions are around us, and they're coming through, and the cost of them is getting better and better by the day. But when the industry properly embrace it, and ultimately we have to stop using gas boilers, then that will come down a lot in cost. But, you know, we can get there. We're not far away from it. We're delivering it today. It's just cost that's prohibitive at the moment, but that will come down, and choice.
Very good. So I've been given some questions that we could think about. So the first one of those is, what are the key issues facing us when it comes to building new homes? Thought we could have some ideas from around the country. We've got an idea from Ipswich to start us off with.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so, I mean...
Sam, do you want to say who you are?
Yeah, sorry.
I know, but not necessarily...
I don't know. Is there anyone here who's hard of hearing and relying on the loop? No. Okay, fine, brilliant. So I can just sort of talk. Yeah, Sandy Martin. I was the Member of Parliament for Ipswich for a phenomenally brief period of time, and unfortunately, but actually about the same brief period of time that Alex was a Member of European Parliament, I think. But it's also a place where a huge part of the fabric of the town was built as council housing in the 60s and 70s. And we are now, just now, like in the last 5 or 6 years, restarting a council house building programme. I think we've built more council houses in the last 6 years than we've built in the previous 46 years. But they're not being built to a particularly high standard because the housing providers, I mean, they're a lot higher standard than the previous ones were, and they're a lot higher standard than some of the private sector houses that are being built, but they're not as high a standard environmentally as I would like to see. And the reason for that is because clearly if you are going for tender and one company comes in with one price and another company comes in with another price, it's very difficult to choose the more expensive ones. It must be difficult for you at Thacum to find yourself being undercut by companies that are doing a worse job. And actually the planning system is not capable of dealing with that, because a planning authority that refuses planning permission to a company because they don't think it's being done to a high enough standard is open to appeal. And most appeals on those grounds, because it's not a planning issue, would fail. So, would you support a really serious strengthening and tightening up of building regulations in order to build quality into all the new build?
Yes. I agree with everything you're saying there. You know, fundamentally, building regs is, whether you like it or not, is the system we use in this country to police the standard of what we build ultimately. You know, and I think there's a lot that can be done there to improve that. It's clearly, if we're going to bring a raise in standards both in quality and in efficiency, which I think is important as well, as we really what net zero is, then you know, it's got to come through that, and sooner rather than later. We need to be pushing harder and harder. It can be done. You know, unfortunately, you know, a lot of our industry is waiting to be told it has to be done, i.e. legislated for. I think there are other tools we've got at our disposal. You know, I think we're talking to lenders whereby we'll see green mortgages coming. You know, and I think the consumer chooses them. Because the consumer's walking down the street and they've got a house that's built to net zero standards and the mortgage is £200 a month cheaper than the one that other builders do offering that's not built to net zero standards, then the consumer will choose, especially if they're at the same price point. So I think, you know, I think building regs, absolutely, we've got to raise standards, we've got to raise quality. One of the things that we're trying to do is we're saying to our partnership, our housing association clients, okay, we understand, and perhaps it's not right to go the full way to net zero now, but why aren't we future-proofing the house for you? Because actually to retrofit, you know, photovoltaic panels and various other bits and pieces in 5 or 10 years' time can be hugely expensive. Let us at least put the wiring in or the ability to do it now, so you're not ripping the fabric of the house apart to do that in 5 or 7 years' time, which you know you've got to do. You know, we all know every home has to be net zero by 2050. Some are setting out 2030. We're the only one of any mid or major builder that's saying 2025, as far as I know. I could be wrong. But the housing associations have got a massive task to get their stock level to a net zero position by 2050. We're seeing some dispose of the most tricky ones, but the other ones, the stuff that's being built now, to me, I cannot understand why we're not future-proofing it now for a relatively small cost. A couple of grand on a unit, you know, could save £20,000 in 10 years' time. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And that's perhaps where building regulations could make that happen. You know, set it out the right way, make it happen. I agree with you entirely.
Very good. Who's a Labour councillor here? Loads of you. Right, very good. Who's in power in a Labour council? A few of you. Good. Right, can you give us some examples from your areas then of the kind of things you're doing to try and get more affordable housing built and what kind of levels of environmental standards it's got and what you would do if we had a Labour government?
It's hard.
It's hard, of course it is.
I talked to developers and begged them to up the aspects of the housing, and they've gone, oh yeah, perhaps we'll think about it. And I think it's that question of cost. And I've said to them, it will make your houses more appealing, but I think in this day and age, that's not something that they think about, because they'll sell their houses anyway. So, you know, they're thinking of the bottom line at the end of the day. And I was encouraged by what you said, actually. And I was going to ask you, actually, how much extra does it cost to kind of future-proof the house, or even to put that technology in the house as it is? Because I don't think it is that much, and to retrofit is going to cost an awful lot of money. But the developers just don't listen to you. And what really annoys me as well is that the developers say that they will build so many affordable houses, and then they come back and say, oh, we can't afford that, so we're going to knock it down from 40 to 30 to 20 to even 15%. And that, as a councillor, is heartbreaking when that happens.
Which part of the country are you from?
Didcot, sorry, Denise MacDonald, Didcot Town Council, leader of Didcot Town Council.
Oh, very good. Anyone else? Yep, very good. Got confused over there. Yep.
Duncan Enright, on the planning committee at West Oxfordshire District Council, so neighbours, and also on the cabinet at County Council, responsible for travel and development. So yes, and we've been told by developers that the problem is landowners. Landowners squeezing the maximum value out of their plots, and therefore the piece in the middle is done at sort of pretty much fixed margin. So the developers, the house builders, haven't got much room to play either way if they're being pushed by the landowners at the other end. So what about land reform? Nationalise the land.
Well, it's come up at all Labour Party conferences since about 1945, hasn't it? So, yeah.
Do you want me to? Yeah. So I mean, yes to both. Clearly, I mean. So let's start with the land. Ultimately, to a lesser or greater degree, you are absolutely right. You know, there is a profit for the business, us as a developer, and we make a profit. Absolutely. There is then a cost, and the build cost roughly is fixed. Okay, in terms of what it costs us to build. A slight rise in quality will see a rise in cost, of course, and when we start to what we call bolt-on sustainability, so if we're bolting on photovoltaics or air source heat pumps, so roughly a gas boiler is circa £600 and an air source heat pump is £3,500. So to put it in real terms, that's your fundamental difference at the moment. Having said that, as I said earlier, the likes of Valiant Ideal, the big boiler manufacturers, know that their tap gets turned off in 2025 and they're now throwing everything at air source heat pumps. So the cost of that will come down dramatically, we all know that. So we're getting there on that to a degree. I think we follow the model that you're talking about, and that is when we turn up to a landowner, we're very clear, you know, if you want something that's going to drive your land value to the very highest, it's not us. It's that simple. Because I can't do that if I'm providing infrastructure on day one, early in the development. I can't do that if I'm building something to a higher or greater standard. And I can't do that if I'm making the statement, which I made clearly earlier, and it's a cornerstone of us as a business, that we've never run a viability exercise. We have never gone to a council and said we can't afford. Every scheme has always been policy compliant with affordable housing. It's 30%, it's 30, 35 or 40, whatever the council tells us is what we'll deliver. And it's tenure blind, and that costs more money as well, because actually, of course, those bigger developers that strip out, you know, put a cheaper front door up, put cheaper windows on, you know, let's not put such nice roof tiles on the roof. You know, fundamentally, we don't do that. So our product is more expensive. The housing association that buys that off me doesn't pay me any more money for that product. It's my choice as a business to do that. But that's a basic premise of getting up and going to work and sleeping at night for me is to create that sort of model. But we're very clear with that now. Then we think when we pitch up to a council, actually, every time we will be, 48% of the way now, 0 to 25, will be policy compliant, absolutely, because every scheme we always have done has been, and there's our track record. We're not going to come back to the private exercise. We increase the chance of getting that claim. And that's the sell from us to our landowners. Some chooses and some don't. And actually, you know, some do choose us. We have some quite substantial schemes coming through the planning system at the moment, several thousand units. And that's on the strength of our landowners saying, yeah, you know what, actually, we want to do that. And some, more than you would think, more landowners, particularly larger ones, when they know they're going to stay local, actually do want to invest in the local, they're going to make a lot of money out of that. If it's worth 10 grand an acre agriculture, we're going to end up paying them probably at least 150, 200. What we won't be doing is paying them £1 million an acre, which is what you see in some areas, and more, to be frank with you. So we won't be paying them, we'll pay them probably, dare I say, a fifth or a tenth, somewhere in that realm of what they'd get off at one of the big boys that's not operating that way. But then we will deliver the shop, the cafe, the primary schools, the secondary schools, the community rooms, the community spaces. And of course, building shops, cafes and gifting to a community is a different kettle of fish financially as well. But that's where we are, that's what we do, that's our model. What we're trying to do is inspire others to change and do the same thing, at least partially do the same thing from the journey with us.
How can we incentivise landowners to behave in that way then? So near us we have the Blenheim Estate, which used to be owned by Duke Marlborough, but is now in a charitable trust, and they're developing homes, but because they're there and they're not going to move away because that's where Blenheim Palace is, they're committing to 60% market rate rented housing and priority for local community people who want to stay in their village, and so they seem to be behaving ethically because they can't run away from their responsibility to the local community. But that's unusual.
It is unusual. It absolutely is unusual. My view is that if a local authority has a good situation with the strength. I mean, where we're coming under pressure is particularly where we're under threat from appeals. And that's the big one, isn't it? And if you've got to have a 5-year housing land supply, and you've got less than that, you're worried and you're pushing more through. If you can get to a position of strength, you've got way more than 5, then you can dictate the pace. And I think that's when it gets quite interesting. That's when we can say, actually, we want 20% biodiversity net gain rather than 10%. And we've committed that from 2025, every scheme we deliver will be 20% biodiversity net gain. We delivered one last year, completed at 41.3%. You can do it, but guess what? You have to start at the start of the process, thinking about that and being that driver. So, when we master plan something now, rather than the traditional approach of our industry, which is get an architect that effectively creates a bulldozer the field and starts putting roads in, we look at our natural asset. Where are our trees? Where are our packets of parcels? Where's our waterways? How can we enhance and connect those rather than just flatten them and get rid of them? And that's you've got to start. All these processes involve starting at the start with those drivers and then moving through. So I think as a local authority, if you're in that position of strength, you can dictate the pace, and then you can start having planning policies that push from 10% biodiversity again to 20. Then you can start saying, actually, you've got to be at net zero by this point, or that far in the journey, because you're less likely to succumb to appeals and the appeals process because you've got a good 5 years. Is my belief. I'm not saying it's the complete answer, but given the system we're working in at the moment, I think that's the right way to go about it. And I think it's right. We've got to, dare I say it, we've got to make the public aware that what landowners are doing. Now, some will have no consequence on others, like that state locally. They don't want everybody knowing locally that they're trying to maximise funds, and actually they're trying to do the right thing. That should be lauded, and then the question should be asked: why is that state over there not doing the same? In my opinion.
I'm a bit confused. In Milton Keynes, I'm from Milton Keynes. In Milton Keynes, all the land belongs to community foundation. So there is no private, landowner. So how come you're referring to landowner and making some restriction to it? And as a developer, because the developer are based in Milton Keynes. The housing they are building, I will witness after 2-3 years, the quality they're claiming at the top standard is really bad. And even the source of painting they use is not washable, not even cleanable. And after 2 years, all skateboarding start to pop out, and the developer is not taking any responsibility because their insurance run out within 18 months or 2 years. So what you're saying, what I witnessed in Milton Keynes is totally different.
Milton Keynes, dare I say, is a little bit unique. And the reason is, of course, it came from a new town. And that was created. All the land in Milton Keynes was part of. So we've seen a lot of new towns over the years in the country. The difference with Milton Keynes fundamentally is that all of the land went into the Commission for New Town Ownership, that then became Milton Keynes Council. So you own and you control all the land there. So that's quite unique. Most towns, most cities, most villages don't have that set up. You know, the land is privately owned, and therefore the expansion is controlled to a degree. Most of the time, there is some kind of land ownership, but it's certainly nothing like Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes is the owner, and of course, what you've done very successfully in Milton Keynes is you've used that land wisely, and you've used it to invest in more land in places as well. So I think, you know, you control the supply of land, and you control who gets the land. I would then suggest that more of a strong arm over the developers and what they're standing, given you control the land, is possibly the way forward. I mean, our industry, to be frank with you, I think our industry has a lot to answer for over the last 5-10 years in the quality of what it's built and the way it's done it. I absolutely agree with that, and I'm on public record many times as saying that. You know, we've set our stall out to be different, but we're not everybody's cup of tea. And actually, there are some people out there that build, I think, shocking standard products. I think I genuinely think we've got a big problem coming with regards to when we get through the whole of fire safety and understand what it means for our industry. We've kind of looked at buildings 18 metres up, we look at 11 metres up. Doesn't mean to say that what they were building was 2 stories high was right either, does it? So, and the standard of the quality is not right, and it does come down to common sense. I mean, I know my teams have issues all the time, particularly housing associations. Why aren't we using washing and paint in those houses? It's not rocket science. Surely you put it in a bathroom, put it in a kid's bedroom, put it in a kitchen, wouldn't you? It just prolongs what you've got. It's not difficult. It's not even that much more expensive. It's pence. But, there's half the time, and we have specifications we're given to build too, and we sit there scratching our head saying, if you did this, it would make it that much better and that much easier, and it would last longer. Why aren't you doing it? So I think there is something there about us getting that spec right and getting the understanding right and a bit more thought into being absolutely right. But I think Milton Keynes is unique. I think given you control the land, you should be able to control what's coming out there.
Yeah, it all belongs to community foundations.
No, exactly.
Community foundations.
Very aware, yeah.
So
it's a very, dare I say, lucky place to be. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, absolutely. But anything from that table over there, as I said in the thing, either there.
I'm interested in the circular economy principles. So, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, very, very interesting to hear sort of what they're looking at there. And I think the model then would be that you build to deconstruct. And I just wonder if you've given any thoughts to the sort of materials that are going into your buildings, how they then at their end of life could somehow be taken down and reused.
Yes.
Any more thoughts?
Can I just respond to that? I mean, we don't actually have that much of a tradition in this country of building to deconstruct.
No, we don't. No.
And there are good reasons for that, I think. I mean, from my own personal experience, the first house that my parents were able to, I was actually born the first year, lived in a caravan, but the first house that we had was about 150 years old. And so far as I know, it's in a better condition now than it was when I was living there, which was 50 years ago. And then the first school that I went to, the second school that I went to, had been built, or a substantial proportion of it had been built in 1120, I think. Mm-hmm. So it was like 850 years old, and still in perfectly good condition. We've got lots of buildings in this country which are over 600 years old and still in perfectly good condition. If you build well, you don't need to deconstruct. And I'll just add to that also, we're using far too much concrete and nowhere near enough timber. Timber is a massively sustainable building product because you are actually embedding the carbon.
Yeah, I understand this. Thank you very much. I'm afraid my entire career has been in construction.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I do understand.
Well, yeah, but not everybody else did.
No, thank you. But I'm afraid to say that in terms of insulating properties, and I've had a conversation already, it's great to hear that, yes, it's great to have good insulation standards, but if you go too far, you end up with ventilation issues and actually health concerns.
Great, yeah.
So, yeah, there's a real sort of interplay there to be considered. But if you want to insulate well, you need to build with the right materials, which obviously you're doing. But I have to say that there will be a time when these materials come to the end of life, and we can't continue to just say that we're going to bulldoze them down and send them to landfill.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. So there's a couple of things there. So interestingly, when we started 3 years ago on the goal of net zero, the second goal that I put with that was that the property should be carbon neutral in production. And that was an interesting one. So what we're talking about there, to be clear, is that clearly we create a carbon footprint when we build something. And this is perhaps the big debate with electric vehicles. You know, they don't use or don't create pollution when they're running around the roads, but of course they're hugely intensive carbon footprint to build the thing in the first place. So I said I want to be carbon neutral production. And the second stipulation behind that was that actually I don't just want to mitigate. So I don't just want to plant loads of trees and make myself feel better.
Absolutely.
What I wanted to do was reduce the carbon footprint of what we're constructing as much as it is feasible and economically feasible. I have to live and operate in the world that we're in today. And actually, do you know, at that point in time, 90-something% of our suppliers couldn't tell us what the carbon footprint of what we're supplying to was. And that was an interesting place to be. Today, as we sit here, we're now over 50% cap, and we've had to take on a journey there and really help them. So we're getting there. We've still got the rest to go between now and 2025. And you're absolutely right. Timber for us is the solution.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of our industry is going towards steel. We've gone timber because of that embodied value of carbon in the timber that we're using.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's one of the most sustainable materials out there. You know, and coming back to your deconstruct point, timber is absolutely there.
Yeah.
Insulation is probably the worst thing we've got in terms of trying to deconstruct it and do something with it. Whilst it's traditional insulation, you know, the foam-based products that we've got now. You know, there are other things out there we can be using, absolutely, but they're not widely available. And I think, are we on a journey? You know, for us, you know, pushing to carbon neutral production and mitigating down as much as possible is the first step. The second step is and that's of course to look at the radius where materials come from, because of course we're looking at the carbon footprint that they're producing the transport to get them to us, etc. as well. So we're looking at that too. So that a lot of thought in that as well. But then the material itself and what its value is and what its pollution value is in terms of deconstructing it, we're not there yet. And I think as an industry we're not there yet.
I wouldn't I certainly wouldn't expect you to be. It's
but
great that you're
one would
even
hope
considering.
that it's the next step. Once we've nailed this, can we then start nailing
We'd
that
also
bit?
need some sort of legislation around it because you've sold the house.
Yeah.
You've walked away, and deconstruction we're talking
I agree,
decades
I
off.
agree. I mean, there is a point. You know, this country we are quite good at reusing what we build in terms of not knocking it over. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you know, and we want to build something that lasts at least 100 years. That's where we're at, rather than something over 30 years.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, there is a point of the value. It comes back to that carbon neutrality. I think that we'll start to nail that in terms of the value of what we're building and what its pollution value is, etc.
Thank you.
Very good. Anyone from the north that strikes me about? Well, Mansfield's not really the north.
Well, that's one of my questions. Why
for us, Danny?
yeah, that's one of my questions. Why aren't you in the north or Mansfield?
We're trying.
Well, you talked about land prices. You know, the land prices are a lot cheaper up north.
Yeah.
And the other aspect I was going to talk about is obviously we're talking about building on brownfield sites. And so, are you able to get into those brownfield sites? Because obviously the infrastructure costs associated with it on brownfield a lot more. And if we're thinking about carbon and working towards zero, all the houses that are currently built, you know, we want to tie in new build with saying, like, I'm going to do 5% of the existing housing stock, I'm going to retrofit them, because that's a massive thing. It'd be great to be able to balance those two things. If we build new, we deal with the ones that we've already got that are in a very poor state.
And I've been wondering about post-pandemic things. Are the types of houses that people want getting different? Do we still want open plan? Are people wanting offices to work from home in? What's the need for garden space? Any other thoughts from the room as well?
Flooding. You know, everyone's got tarmac over everything, concrete everywhere. You know, we've got to look at that aspect so that the water can get away or it's stored up. That's a massive part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in a lot of the country we have water shortages.
Yeah.
So you know, I'm struggling. I struggle a little bit, and so one of the things that we've found is that we've gone on our journey, particularly around the zero carbon placement, is we had the answers 70 years ago, and we've lost them. So a lot of villages or reasonable sized developments have their own reservoir, So one of the most carbon intensive things we do in this country is pumping out clean water supply around the countryside. Because we now pump it miles and miles and miles. So why are we collecting that water locally, capturing it, treating it, and then pumping it back locally? Yet we spend huge amounts of money on water storage, suds designs and bits and pieces to mitigate the flow of the water with those tarmacked areas or whatever off in the countryside. Why aren't we collecting that and using it locally? And then getting rid of a massive carbon problem as well. So we have loads of answers that we used to do, and we, for whatever reason, have lost it.
What do the water companies say to that?
The legislation needs to change. It's that simple. They need to be forced. To be fair, we're working with DEFRA and with BASE at the moment, because I think the same is true as well with power. If we're putting photovoltaic panels on the roof of 200 or 2,000 properties, why aren't we taking that back to a central battery park and then putting that display back or that supply back out of the? If you've got PV to one battery in one house, it's hugely efficient in flapping the supply, isn't it? So again, we need to join up think, if that makes sense.
We'll be all right when we renationalise it all.
If that's the answer, I mean, I'm not convinced that's the answer either. I think we have to think local rather than bigger areas on these sorts of principles.
So we have allowed these companies to just run roughshod over our services. I mean, what's gone on with the water supplies is absolutely terrible. The issues here where Thames Water have just been dumping raw sewage into the sea, and they've been fined for it. They just build that into their cost of business. They don't care about fine.
There needs to be some other consequence to the fine.
There does. There really does. Yeah.
Exactly.
Very good. Any other thoughts? If Dan were here, he would say about flooding on the infrastructure point, which is in the area that he represents. He's got Bristol, which is desperate for housing, and then he also represents areas like Bath and North East Somerset, Jacob Rees, Morgsea, for example, who are all saying no houses. Well, there's an obvious solution there, which is that there is a real desire to live in places like Bristol, near a river. But you need the government to come up with cash for the infrastructure to deal with that. And then that solves a political problem as well, because frankly there are lots of parts of the country who are a bit funny about having new homes. But there are cities, and they tend to be Labour cities, who want them. But we have got to square that kind of circle. And I agree with your point on the east being particularly dry, as well as a former East of England MP. Water is always an issue there in getting some of it. I also think tree planting as well.
Yeah.
I think we got into a real bidding war in the last general election on how many trees we were all going to plant. And it was literally a numbers game, as opposed to if you actually think about where you're going to plant those trees, they can be part of the solution for flooding as well. And I just think we need to kind of get those environmental concerns, brought to the forefront as well. Right. Any other thoughts from you? Yes.
I was interested in what you said about, about everybody having to take their little part of the burden of extra housing.
Yeah.
And there is something in that. So in the area, in Oxfordshire County, we've got, of course, the city, which is constrained by the Greenbelt. We've also got the market towns, which have taken the bulk of recent development. We've got hamlets and villages which have been sort of let off. But some of those are dying. They've lost a shop and things like that because they haven't had any development, and it's that keeps it vital. Having said that, we're also looking at zero carbon transport as soon as possible, and definitely by 2040. So doing that and developing in remoter locations is a real challenge. So how can we make sure that not only the developments themselves are zero carbon, but also they contribute to a zero carbon environment through being efficient in terms of access to services and employment and so on?
So we call that zero carbon placement,
right?
Which is the third strand of what's important to us. I mean, clearly it does work when you've got scale. You're absolutely right. I think it's, coming back to your original point, it's an interesting one, isn't there? If we go back to the real council housing boom, particularly sort of the post-war, everywhere had some council housing.
Yes, yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's a hamlet almost of 20 houses, it got its share. And why today they're excluded? You know, and I do get sustainability. I do get the fact that, you know, we need to make sure we're near the facilities you talk about, etc., or at least the ability to get there in a zero carbon fashion, etc. too. So I think our view, and touching as well. So our view is we have now designed a product that has those home office stuff in the bottom of the garden, so it's a piece of very difficult. But we've also, you know, on the larger scale developments, we're looking at village shop, village cafe, but also a village WeWork facility. So imagine a space where you've got light touch laboratory space, you've got meeting room space, and you've got desk space that you can rent if you live in that community for next to nothing. Because the building we build, and we give that in, again, to Plunkett Foundation Business Community Trust run. We run the shop, the cafe, and the WeWork facility as well. It's keeping that ability to do those things locally. I think it's important that we you know, we try and do that. Again, I fully accept that we are somewhat unique in that response. You know, it doesn't make it wrong. I think, you know, from our point of view, the next stage for us now is very much about design and how can we take, you know, cars away from cyclists and pedestrians and separate the two, and that's what we're absolutely trying to do now everywhere we are. You know, some of it, if you've ever been to, it looks like centre bars, in fact. It's almost lodges, houses and groups of them, and the parking's over there. So we've got a variety of different solutions. That is the one. For us, also that community thing. You know, we looked at knocking over the problem. So, well, if you've got a community shop and you can't drive your car there, how are you going to get shopping back? If you're 75 years old, how are you going to get shopping back? It won't work. It won't work. Okay, no, it won't. But you walk to the shop, order what you want. Then at school, the community shop could pay a couple of 14-year-olds to come on their bike and fill the shop. Because actually, do you know what? That's what happened with the butcher's boiler bike 70 years ago. And it comes back to we had the solutions, if that makes sense. You know, but you've got the solutions. And then, of course, that creates community. And it's interesting, because that's the piece of work we've been looking at. We've been working with Oxford County Council. We've been working with you guys now for 18 months, 2 years, and Celia, the Chief Executive Direct Reports team, on exactly that. How do you create community? How do you really make it work? And how do you get, you know, Ethel, who's 78 years old in that bungalow, how do you get around part of the community? How do you make them interact? It's principles like that that we see really working. But it does involve a little bit of thought, which is interesting.
The top tip, by the way, you have to find those 10 council houses in every village and hamlet, because they're the people signing nomination papers normally. That's the candidate in every terrible rural area. So yeah. Right, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Any final thoughts from the room?
Can I just say, on that topic of the infrastructure, I think for me that has to be front-loaded into the development. I know you said you do, but there are lots.
It's not normal for our industry.
We've had, I think, in sort of Great Western Park where I am, I think it's about 10 years. Yeah. We had to wait for schools, shops, and things. Yeah. And so all those lovely ideas work. You know, I'm a great advocate of the 15-minute community, but the infrastructure has to be there and front-loaded. And it would be good to have that.
There is you can look at the housing, because you can't change. It's far more difficult to change behaviour of people down the line than it is when they move in new. That was we were on the NHS in Healthy New Towns programme 3-4 years ago, and that was one of the real learnings out of that. Change behaviour to be on day one. I had a very, very long conversation with Bridget Smith, who's the leader of South Campbell, about Campbell. And Campbell was built to the west of Cambridge, and it was just a collection of housing, and it went from nothing within 10 years to one of the highest suicide rates in the UK. Because there was nothing but housing there. You know, and actually when you then start to put the infrastructure in, that changed that balance. You know, and it is sad, you know, we just as an industry do not deliver that. You know, our view is we've got to put schools and shops, cafes, and that's why we do work with the Plunkett Foundation actually, because if you give the shop to Carl or others, you know, if it's not got the patronage after 3 years because you've not built sufficient housing, they close it. So how do we keep it open and give it a community shop? And we have to front load that. We pay 25-30 grand a year to keep that shop going, whilst it needs that sustaining early doors. And that's just part of our commitment to it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I could not agree with infrastructure earlier. It's the key.
Absolutely. And the MP for Cambridge once got into trouble for making a joke about Camborne as being a mixture of Cameron and Osborne. And it being an entirely soulless and horrible place. Although I have to say it has improved over recent years. Yes, it really has.
But it was an absolute example of how to get it wrong.
Yep. Very good. Do you want to make any final remarks?
No,
you made enough. Very good. Well, thank you everyone.